For to answer your questions, or perhaps also to motivate myself the discussion. And I may start with one, just to trigger the discussion. So we heard in the morning, in the early session, the term hard to abate sector, right? And of course, we heard in the policy discussion by Kannelina the hard to abate view of the power sector. So my first question would be: is there in Greece, where Elpedison also operates, perhaps also in other countries, something relevant like we heard this morning, a strategy, a clear strategy about carbon management?
Actually, we're part of the EU, so basically we tend to follow the general EU strategy. So I would say that in Greece for the moment, there is a special focus on hard to abate industries, but we are trying, let's say, to have a more holistic approach. So there have been discussions with companies who are active in this field, with representatives from the industry. So I would say that we are negotiating the role of the power sector in the CCS deployment. So there's a clear focus on the hard to abate industries, but the power sector is also a sector that they are additionally investigating for such applications.
Thank you. Perhaps a follow-up question on this, again for Kannelina, but all of you can of course express their opinion. You mentioned something, if I'm not mistaken, about more realistic targets from 2030 on. Does this mean that the targets of EU, from the power sector perspective, you believe they are not realistic?
I think that the European Union, more or less, they have been adapting their targets from time to time. So when we have seen that it's impossible to reach the net zero targets, they came back, they recalculated the move forward with the additional, let's say, legislations. So I would actually say that, yes, we have to see how the situation will evolve, but we have to remain very realistic about what is happening and what's the perception for the next 5, 10, 50, or 20 years. So yes, we're quite skeptical about it. We have to definitely try to filter the reality and try to be more specific in what we're expecting for the next decades.
Perhaps from the social acceptance part, was this question part of the questionnaire, how realistic people find the targets of EU with respect to climate change?
Well, for the moment, we only have the pre-test data. I think we're going to have a better picture after the post-test, because they're going to see the module and see what CCUS technology is more about, and see the contribution of technology to reduction of CO2 emissions. But I think what Kannelina said about more realistic goals is important also in terms of social acceptance, because sometimes when we do these social studies, we have to be very sincere to the people that we approach. And this is important to, when you say something, that it is really true, because anyway, we have the responsibility of giving accurate scientific knowledge and accurate hope as well for the future. So we have to be very careful what we say, how much hope they give to them. And because we have this responsibility, we are in between, social scientists are in between the technology people and the public. And we have to be very sincere and very realistic to them what's going on.
Okay, you wanted to say so.
Yeah, also it is related to what we were discussing before, and I think when we talk about realism, we need to also understand that there cannot be contradictory policies. So that is one thing, and the other thing is that again, there is in Europe a couple of countries that are like dictating the main policies, and then the rest of the countries are following. And I think the situation of each country is different. The type of resources that each country has is different. So sometimes I think that each country has to be a bit more independent in that sense in order to be really realistic. And I agree with the idea of transparency, because I think as well we started to like maybe in a rush to release lots of decrees maybe, and there is not a common agreement. So if we are contradictory, if we are not realistic, then big companies might also not like it if at some point you start like putting a lot of regulations and then you change the rules in the middle of the game. So I think we need to be careful with all those aspects.
Perhaps questions from the audience. Okay. It's only 1 week. Okay.
I have a question for the LC perspective. Because you hold the dynamic LCA for the process for this very high resolution level of the LCA, what the main purpose or benefits for the no matter from the operation perspective or the investment perspective, what you change? You change the time step to per hour per day from before we just average the mix. What the benefits?
Yeah, thank you. Well, as we mentioned, there are program shifts. Not all the capture plant is not all the time operating. So to organize in which moment might be better to operate, in which to program the maintenance, for all these type of reasons, I think it's a good idea to implement dynamism, to know how the integral of the different sections will look with respect to an average, if it's different, if it's not, and also it will give resolution, for example, with respect to different seasons and with respect to different countries as well. Then these results can be compared with the energy mix of, for example, France, where there is more nuclear, or other countries where there is no solar availability at all. So I think those are all the type of results and insights that the dynamic LCA on this type of process can give. Is that replies to your question?
Questions? Sakis?
So one question about the societal analysis is whether you're asking the people that you interview if they're how they feel about the prices of CCUS, because obviously there will be a cost. For example, we saw that in Germany, I think it was that putting CCUS in carbon capture basically in power plants is okay, but it's not going to be subsidized. So this might increase energy prices. So how do people realize that this might have an effect?
I guess you're talking about the industrial stakeholders, because people who participated in our study, the great majority of them were engineers and knew about the technology. And that's why one of the first obstacles that faced in their responses was the high cost. They knew. Because when we asked them about the obstacles, I mean, what facilitates or what hinders, let's say, the implementation of those technologies, they talked about technological maturity, but also the high cost that is very likely.
And I have also another question for Ada. I hear a lot of talk about nuclear energy and as a means of decarbonizing, energy, whatever. And I'm very worried, and I was wondering if you have ever compared in terms of sustainability, whether it's better to have CCUS or whether it's better to have nuclear energy?
No, personally, I haven't made the comparison, but I think one of the things that might come out is with respect to uncertainty, because there is a small but very dangerous risk around nuclear. The danger is very small, the risk is very small, but the consequences, if that very small percentage happens, is very big. So is in that point with respect to nuclear fission that the problem it is. With respect to nuclear fusion, it might be different. It's at the very early stage, it's not demonstrated yet that it can be done. If you ask me personally, perhaps I would give more resources to that type of research to improve more the fusion rather than the fission. So yeah, you ask me, but that's a personal look. I don't know if countries would agree.
I guess in this case, the social acceptance issue would be even more than the environmental sustainability. Other questions? I may ask one, perhaps to the LCA, but also to the industry at the same time. One approach, and I don't advocate for that, but since it is one approach, I have to mention it, of communicating life cycle assessment results to stakeholders is to monetize everything. So Ada showed the recipe framework that has how many indicators, 15, 16 indicators. One approach in LCA is to transform all of them into money. Does this help from receiving the message?
So actually, we're generating power. So we're a private company. Our goal is to create money out of power generation. So I would suppose that yes, monetizing would be a very efficient way to pass the message for someone. So I would say yes.
I have something to say with respect to this, and I think also it depends on the level of perspective that a company or a country has with respect to the investment of the resources, because something or management of the resources, because something that can look expensive now, it depends on the time that we are considering. In the future might be very good. For example, if we make an analogy with respect to studying and getting a degree, in the moment might seem a lot of time investment, but then it pays off in the long term. So perhaps it depends on the vision of the company and of the country as well.
Dynamic processing. Dynamic.
Okay.
It's okay.
So I guess because I assume that there is a sustainability assessment group in Elpedison. Does it present results in this way by monetizing aspects?
Our shareholders which are developing strategies. So one of the approach must be the monetizing approach. But of course, as we say, it's dynamic. You have to see what's the strategy of the company, what's the strategy on the national level, where the situation is going on the European and worldwide level. And you have it's a polyparametric system that you have to take everything into consideration in order to be able to take the necessary decisions.
Based on my experience, interviews with the industrial stakeholders, the majority of them were engineers, as I said. But I met people that actually, because I didn't have experience before talking to people from the industry, I was really impressed by the level of their knowledge, but also the level of dedicating about the issues. Many of them were specialized in environmental issues, environmental engineering. They had vision, about these issues, in addition, of course, to the money aspect of the companies, because they are private companies, but I was very happy to discuss with them, and actually our interviews lasted longer because we had many things to talk about, and I was learning from them, but I was impressed by the caring aspect that I recognized in the
Any follow-up question? If not, let's make our last short break, and we will continue afterwards with a closing session of the workshop.